All right, so welcome everybody. This should definitely be a pretty big call with lots of really great content. My name is Jessica Wright, and I'll be moderating today's event. Just a little about me. I've been with Corning for almost 6 years now. I work primarily with the campus and events team, and I manage our talent community. So if you've ever been to a booth at a career fair, you've definitely received emails following up and different newsletters from me. A few housekeeping notes. Everybody will be placed on mute, so we ask that you remain on mute for the duration of the presentation. We would like this to be interactive and assume that it will be, so feel free to send questions in the chat. Some of the questions we'll be able to just answer via chat, and some of them we'll bring to the discussion. You can adjust the view to see more than a couple lines. We also highly encourage video from everybody, so don't be shy. In today's session, we will be covering interview tips and tricks. If you're nervous about interviews or want to fine-tune your skills, our wonderful recruiting team will cover a variety of interview types and how to best prepare. As a bonus, I know we had capped this at 150, and then we had sent it out to the waiting list. What we'll probably do, just kind of looking at numbers right now, is everybody who attends will have that opportunity to participate in the mock interview. If it does go over 150, we'll probably just cross-check that with the registrant. So we will keep you posted on that. And with that introduction, I'm turning it over to you guys.
Hey everyone. I'm Kim Smithman, and I've been with Corning for about 9.5 years now, currently working as a staffing consultant supporting finance, global supply management, and aviation.
I will jump in. My name is Julie Sutton. I have been with Corning for almost 8.5 years in a couple of different roles, but currently I support HR, legal, and IT hiring.
Hi, my name is Kelly Burgess, and I am a staffing consultant and have been with Corning since 2011, and I support the commercial group within our optical communications business. So if you go anywhere and you have your phone and you want to see a video or text somebody or send them a picture, the group I support helps to make that possible.
Okay, I think we can probably advance and hit the agenda. Okay, so today's hot topic is really kind of do's and don'ts in the interview process. We're going to take you through how to walk through your resume in an interview. We're going to touch on some behavioral interview questions and how to help you answer those, how to present your best self, and then we're going to break down the different types of interviews and talk you through how to prep, what to do during, and what to do post each type of interview. I think we can hit the next slide, Kelly. Thanks. So Julie, Kelly, and I will be presenting each of the different items on the slide. So I'm going to cover the resume walkthrough. So just a couple of things to make sure of. First of all, probably many of you joined the resume writing workshop last week. So a lot of the tips and tricks in that are going to be important for you to understand as you're walking through your resume. One of the biggest things for me is making sure that you know what's on your resume and you can explain it and talk to it. I've had a couple situations where managers or the interview team members have asked candidates, why did you choose to do your resume this way? And maybe they've had somebody write it for them, or if they've hired a professional service to do it, and they just really don't know. So make sure you understand your resume inside and out. Make sure that you double and triple check the spelling and the grammar. Those things are definitely key as hiring teams are looking through them. And when you're walking through a resume, sometimes it might be over the phone with one person. Sometimes it might be in a panel setting and you're kind of presenting it to a multitude of people. You want to make sure that you're really hitting the accomplishments on there, not just reading through the resume. Really, things that you can talk of that have made an impact or you've made an impact on. And then a couple of don'ts, we kind of touched on this with the do's, but really don't just read through it and list the responsibilities you've had. really show what you've done to impact certain projects or certain tasks that you've done. And definitely don't speak negatively about previous employers or current employers. You know, don't say things like, I left there because I couldn't get along with the manager, or I'm leaving because I can't seem to get sign off on anything. There's a lot of red tape. Some of those things I've heard that really, you know, you shouldn't be talking negatively about them. So figure out what type of questions the hiring teams may ask, try to anticipate them, and be able to speak to everything in a positive way when you're describing your experience. That's really all I have on that one.
Okay, so I will talk about the behavioral interview. I think this is an important thing to be aware of. It's how a lot of companies interview. Corning uses this in all of their interviews. So first I'll talk a little bit about what that is and kind of how to be most successful about that. So a behavioral interview, that's when the company or the hiring manager, they know what they want. And they're going to ask questions to pull out the specific skills that you have to relate to the job. So it's not going to be how would you behave, but rather how did you behave in that circumstance. So they're really not looking for the hypothetical. They're looking for you to relate the experience you have to the job description and the job requirements that they have. So it sounds kind of easy, but it can be a little bit complex. So again, it's worth looking into, it's worth reading into, and it's worth practicing. So one of the ways to be really successful with this is to, and it sounds simple, is to know the job description. You need to know what you're interviewing for, what the requirements are, and then know what your experience is. You know, obviously you will have already gone through your resume at this point, but you really want to be able to relate your experience, whether it's through school, through internships, through part-time jobs, through school clubs. You know, there's a number of things that you've done to date that are going to relate to these jobs. So you want to think ahead of time, okay, the requirements are ABC, the requirements are leadership. And this is an example that I have that I can relate to that question. Because again, it's how have you done this in the past, not how would you do this in the future. So you want to really understand your experience, how it relates to the job description, and be prepared to talk to that. So like I said, read the job description, be very comfortable with that, know your experience, and be able to relate it back to the specific requirements within the job description. Feel very comfortable talking about that. And one of the structures that companies use, including Corning, which is very popular, is the STAR approach. So it's situation, task, action, and results. And so it's a really great way for you to structure your answers to make sure that you're answering the question. So that stands for the situation, the S in there. It's kind of, you know, what was the problem? You know, when you're answering the question of how you handle this, you know, what was your problem? That's the situation. Make sure you point that out pretty clearly. The task part of it is, you know, what did you need to do? Or what were the tasks involved with that? And then action is how you did it. And then obviously results are what were the outcomes. So you want to make sure when you're answering these questions that you're using this methodology, because then you're hitting all the points that they're looking for, and you're going to be most successful in that. And the best way to do that is to practice. So practice beforehand, listen to the questions. It's okay to pause. It's okay to listen to their question, and then be ready to answer it. You know, if it says there, ask for clarification, listen, all of these things are totally fine. I can't tell you how many interviews I've done throughout the years where somebody's asked me to repeat the question, rephrase it. These are all things that we're comfortable doing. So don't let that hold you back. You just want to make sure that you answer the question. Again, it sounds simple, but I can't tell you how many times I get feedback from a hiring manager that says, well, you know, I asked this question and they kind of danced around it, but they never really got there. It's probably one of the more common bits of feedback that we get across the board. So using that STAR approach, you're going to make sure that, again, you hit the situation, the task, the action, and the results. So it's a problem, what you needed to do, how you got there, what the actual results were. So you want to have those examples ready to go That way you're very comfortable talking about them in front of people, and you're ready and you're prepared, and that little bit of work up front is really going to show in that actual interview. And the more you do it, the more comfortable it's going to be. So that's a little bit about behavioral questions, behavioral interviewing. Again, it's very popular. It's not the only way, but it is something worth looking into. And a couple of don'ts there, obviously, don't ramble, stay on topic. It's very easy as you're answering these questions to stray off course. So again, using this approach and being prepared for these questions is going to allow you to stay on track, to get your point across, and really present your best self and your best experience to answer their questions, to put you in the best position to get the job. So that is my little bit on behavioral questions and interviewing.
Wonderful. So I am going to jump in and talk about how you really present your best self, and some of what you've heard shared by Kim and by Julie, it kind of flows right into this. So everybody is nervous before an interview. If it's a phone interview, if you're going on site to the office, if it's going to be a virtual interview, which we've all had to kind of adjust ourselves to in the world that has become our new normal. And if I ever hear anyone say, no, I'm not really nervous, I worry for them a little bit. So I always want to hear that, there's, a certain level to be a little bit nervous, but excited. But it concerns me when someone says, oh, no, I'm not nervous at all. A little bit of that is healthy. It's okay. Very normal. So, when you think about this, you're kind of on point all day in your interview, and you really want to just try your hardest to be yourself. Don't pretend to be somebody who you're not. You're really trying to present, who you are, and, have the company really determine, okay, do they seem like they're going to be a good cultural fit with how we operate and how our team works? They're looking for signs of that as they spend time with you. You want to be genuine. Obviously in the things that you say and the questions that you ask. Sometimes there could be an interview that is all day long, right? That's been known to happen sometimes, and they can be tiring. But regardless of how many people you're going to be spending your time with, really try and keep your stamina up, and almost treat each interview like it is the first one of the day. Sometimes we hear from hiring managers and people who participate in interviews that they seemed low energy. They came across as low energy. They didn't really have any questions. They weren't very engaging. They could have been that way with the first 2 or 3 people, but then got tired as the day went on. So just remember, try and treat each interview like it is your first one of the day. And it's also really important, when you come in and interview with a company, you get exposure to a lot of different people, not only the manager, but the team you'd be working with. Most times you're meeting the HR manager. And in some cases, you're interacting with their corporate security, you're interacting with administrative assistants. And one thing you want to remember is that every person you interact with is deserved, they deserve respect, and make sure that you are treating everyone with the utmost respect, because again, this is all kind of part of that interview process. They want to understand how you act and how you present yourself. So that is very, very important. I can tell you that in my experience, I have seen where, candidates presented themselves very well to the team, but they were, maybe a little bit dismissive or rude to an administrative assistant or someone, again, checking them in to get a temporary badge. And, that feedback also gets shared. So that's why it's so important to remember that, because people have done it and you can see. Couple things you want to focus on not doing. Really, there's, I think, a way to be confident without showing an ego. I think there's a balance there between the two. You definitely don't want to come in acting as if you know everything about everything and nothing's going to stump you, and you know it all. You've got the experience and you know it. I've seen folks come in, and sometimes that is a little bit of how they come across. And in many companies today, there's just not a lot of room for ego. especially not at Corning. That's just not how they operate. So you want to make sure that you're keeping that in check as you go on. Don't overshare. So I know lots of times with interviews, you know, depending on the setup, you may go to lunch with a few people from the team, or maybe you do an early breakfast, or maybe do dinner the night before or following the interview. A lot of companies like to do that. And sometimes it can be really easy to be like, oh, okay, well, we're in a restaurant setting and I feel like I know these people a little bit and I'm starting to relax and be comfortable. Just remember, you are still on an interview. It's not in the office, but you're still being interviewed and assessed, even if you're at a restaurant. So just try not to, you know, make yourself appear too casual or share information that you shouldn't be sharing. And again, I have heard stories how this has happened over lunch interviews, and you know, the team doesn't really know how to react. They don't really know what to say when the candidate has said some different things. So just make sure that that is not what you're doing. And Kim, I will advance to the next one.
Okay. Before we get started on how to prep and what to do during and post the interview, can we just have everybody kind of put in the chat, where are y'all from? And Jess, would this be an appropriate time to take any questions as well on the first part of the presentation, or should we leave those for last?
Nope, we can start with questions if you want. I haven't seen any come through yet. I did want to let you know that because Kelly is the presenter, it's not letting me add polls. So we might want to just kind of ask those and get the responses, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So
no questions yet. I think we're good to go on.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start to talk about how to prepare for a phone interview specifically. So one of the things you want to do is do the research on the company. So, you know, don't just kind of pop up their website and skim through it. Really do your research on the company as a whole, as well as on the individual division or business you may be interviewing for. That allows you to prepare some questions relative to that specific job, that specific company, that specific business. A lot of companies are, you know, public companies. You can get a lot of information if you do your research on them. The other thing you want to make sure that you're aware of is your social presence. So as you are looking on the website and looking for information on the company, they're doing the same on you. So make sure you're aware of social media, what you have posted out there. I mean, even do a quick Google search on your name. Make sure there's no surprises. We've certainly had some issues come up. All of us have throughout our careers here at Corning with different social media concerns. So have an awareness of that. If you do have a list of the folks you're going to be speaking with, do a quick LinkedIn search on them, get to know who you're going to be talking with, get to know a little bit about their career. It'll only help you relate your experiences to them. And again, the job description in the website, just make sure you're going over those in detail. Pick out any questions you may have relative to the role, to the company. Always come armed with appropriate questions to ask the person on the other end of the line. And Julie?
Okay.
We actually did have a question, which I think is a really good one. How much company research is enough? As we all know, there's a lot of content on a company website. So any direction on that? And if we're going to go over it later, let me know.
We didn't really have any thoughts to go over it later. What I would say, I'm going to kind of answer it from the businesses and divisions and functions that I support. So a lot of the feedback with, say, finance is people aren't looking at the financials, the reports that they're submitting. That's a really disappointing thing when they're coming in looking for a financial analyst job, just doing that piece of the research to be able to talk intelligently about numbers. So I would say enough to have an understanding of the specific business that you're interviewing for, as well as the company as a whole at a high level. And I'll let Julie, obviously, and Kelly chime in as well.
Kelly, you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. That is a great point, Kim. And, you know, it's interesting. If you look at Corning, for example, Corning is one corporation, but they have a number of different lines of business. And, you know, for example, I support the optical communications division, and nothing bothers them more than when a candidate comes into interview and they say, well, listen, what do you know about, Corning? What kind of research did you do? What did you learn? And when they make a statement like, well, I know you make Gorilla Glass, or I know you made, glass for TV screens, that's no good, right? They want to know that you've been specific, so you understand the line of business you're going into interview for, and then really center your research around that. I would say if there are any, I wouldn't pull a lot of things that anyone could find just on their website. I would, spend some time trying to dig a bit deeper. So again, if there are any, news articles or announcements in different trade publications, I know a couple of years ago, Corning did a very large deal with Verizon, and it was very public, and you could find it anywhere. So just, I would say, try to be somewhat specific and not just gather the very generic things that anybody could find.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also support corporate staff. And so that's HR, legal, IT, doing a Google search of what's in the news, what's going on with them. If you're in IT, are they working on any new technologies? Are they doing any implementations? If you know who your interviewers are and you kind of look them up, see if they're paying in anything for any awards or there's anything exciting going on. I've been with Corning for over 8 years and I'm still learning new things, but a lot of people don't have a ton of information on what they do. So getting yourself well-versed, knowing a good background, knowing the division or the group that you're going to be talking to, and even being ready with some questions about that. If you need some help connecting the dots and saying, hey, I found this to be interesting, but can you tell me a little bit more about this? It's okay to not know everything, but the fact that you show interest is going to be what they're looking for, that you know some and that you want to know more, is always a great angle to take.
Yeah, I think having that curiosity is huge. And when you can demonstrate that to a manager or a team, I think that's a very, very positive impression that you can leave on them when they see that you're curious, you're interested, you genuinely want to know more.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Does anybody have anything else around that? No? All right. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for your phone interview. So as you're going through the interview process, oftentimes you'll go through the application. You may talk to a recruiter on the phone, and you may talk to the hiring manager on the phone before you actually go into the on-site. Obviously this is a different time right now, so you may have more phone interviews than anything else, but there's a few general rules that you want to be aware of. Even if you're just on the phone, and there's no video and there's no person in front of you, you want to smile. Your body language, your facial expressions, a lot of those are going to come through in your tone. So you want to make sure that your body is in a fairly relaxed stance. And that's just going to shine through when you're talking. You don't want to be super monotone. You want to sound excited. You want some inflection in your voice, because they can't see you. All they can do is hear you. A lot of it is going to come through the tone of your voice and how you're asking your questions. So you want to be very aware of that. So be as comfortable as you can, even if you have to fake it until you make it. You're not the only one. You just want to do the best that you can. Ask questions. Questions are huge. And it sounds so silly. It sounds so basic, but every interviewer wants to be asked questions. So even though it's a phone interview, even though you're not in person, have some questions lined up. These can be fairly basic questions that you ask everybody to get their opinion on the organization, their values, their role, their growth. There's a lot of strategies that you could take there that these questions would work well for everybody, or they could be more specific to the job. It really depends how curious you are and what questions you may have. Again, make sure you're in a quiet place. Show interest, try not to be distracted. Again, even though you're on the phone and they can't see you walking around. I mean, I'm a pacer, right? Like sometimes when I'm on the phone, I like to pace. it's not a good strategy, right? Like I've been talking to coworkers and I've had them say like, are you walking around? And it's like, oh yeah, sorry guys, I'm walking around. So, sit down, be comfortable, even though it's not a face-to-face interview, treat it similar to that. Don't pace through your house like I would do, because that's not the right strategy, and it can come through, God forbid you tripped or you walked into something, you just don't want to put yourself in that situation. So sit tightly, be calm, smile, be excited, show interest. Again, these are simple things, but they're going to go really far as far as showing your interest, being professional, being excited about the role. These are all things that are really important. Of course, don't interrupt. Sometimes you get excited, they ask a question that you're ready for and you're like, all right, I got this, and you want to get into it. Well, just like let them finish the question, right? You want to know where they're going with that question. Maybe it's a two-part question, who knows, but you want to be ready for it. So don't interrupt, take a second and answer it, the best that you can. Try to watch your grammar, make sure you're, presenting your best self. Everybody can use slang and work things into conversations. You just want to make sure that you're coming across as professional as possible, that you're answering the questions, and that you have just minimal distractions, which again, why sitting in a quiet place is going to be one of the easiest ways to accommodate that. So again, pretty straightforward, but it's just something to think through and be prepared for, so you can really present your best self in that phone interview and then get to the next stage.
And, I think back, I've had some experience where we've set up phone interviews between a candidate and a manager. And afterwards, we're excited. We want to know how it went. So we connect with the manager and say, hey, how was your call with Sue? How did it go? And I've actually experienced a few times where the manager says, I'm pretty sure they were driving during the phone interview. Or I'm pretty sure I could tell they were just maybe sitting in their car. And so I know it would seem, very common sense to not do that, but you definitely want to make sure that however you schedule this, that, like Julie said, it's going to be in the right place, the right time. So you're not distracted, because I remember one time we had someone on their way to the airport. They were traveling for business and they're, focused on, getting into the airport. Then you can't focus on a phone interview. You can't present your best self when you've got all these other things around you. I've had examples where, someone's been in the middle of a phone interview and they actually stop and they speak to another person that they are around. So I know it seems, oh my gosh, who would ever do that? It happens. So just be very mindful of that. So after you do the phone interview, a couple really good best practices here is to always follow up with your recruiter. Circle back, let them know, hey, I talked to this manager today. We talked for about, 30 minutes. Here's, an overview of what we discussed. Here were some of the questions. And here's how we left it, right? We want to get your viewpoint and your feedback as well as the managers. And I think it's also fair to follow up. If you don't get an opportunity to do this in the phone call, you can always work with your recruiter and just say, were there any unanswered questions? And you can do this during an on-site interview and a virtual interview. I think they really like it when candidates follow up and say, did I answer the question, fully? Because sometimes they'll say, well, a little bit, but I really wanted to hear about this. And the candidate says, oh, okay, yeah. So don't ever be afraid to ask that question. Number one, is there anything we didn't cover? And number two, it's totally fine to say, did that help answer the question? Again, I think managers, they like that. The worst thing you can do is just assume that you did so well and so phenomenal that you can just sit back and wait for the phone calls to come. Don't do that, right? You want to make sure that you follow up with a thank you. And, in today's world, mostly that will be done through your recruiter. There are a lot of companies that say, well, we're not necessarily going to give out the email addresses of the manager or HR or whatever it may be. So you can always do that through your partner, your recruiter, right? And just, do a thank you note, hey, thank you so much for your time. And then try and include and incorporate a few things that you maybe spoke of during the phone interview, something that kind of made you connect with that individual. If there was something that you wanted to share and maybe you forgot about it because you were nervous or you ran out of time, you could put that in there. You know, hey, I know we talked about, you know, this one aspect of this, and I wanted to share blah, 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 just to kind of maybe close any loops that are there. So always important to follow up, thank them for their time, and, you know, again, make sure we've addressed all the questions and let them know of your interest level.
All right, guys, we have some questions that came in while you guys were talking. First one is it a good idea to ask about the experience of the hiring manager in the company? And they followed it up by saying, I mean, like the hiring manager's challenges and accomplishments in the company.
I think that's totally appropriate. You know, a lot of times they are kind of looking for you, like Kim said earlier, you know, do a little search on LinkedIn and try and find, you know, the information about them. Maybe they're somewhere on the company's website. But I think it's appropriate to understand what their career progression has been. You know, where did they start out? You know, how did they get to where they are today? Why do they love to get up and come work for Corning and do what they do every day? Most people will be thrilled to share that story and that journey with you. So yeah, 100%. I think it's fine to ask.
All right, very good.
Agreed.
And then the next question was, how many follow-ups and how frequent is proper? If I follow up once and they are not decided and send another email 2 weeks later, do I appear bothersome?
That is a very, very good question. And Julie and Kim, please feel free to jump in as well. I think that we have to take it on a basis of, well, what was the interview? So let's just say now we're talking about a phone interview. If you follow up 2 or 3 times with your recruiter, I want to say with us, you're going to have an answer. You're going to know where you stand and whether or not you're moving to the next step. When it comes to on-site interviews, you know, again, with us, you know, we're going to get you the feedback and the update and let you know. So I would say, I don't know. I don't know that I answered that the best way possible. Julie or Kim, what would you add?
I would say, I think it depends where you are in the process. You know, if nobody's reached out to you and you haven't spoken to anybody and all you did is apply, you know, you may just want to, if you have no contact there, you may just want to reach out once. You know, once you phone screened with a recruiter, you know, it's their job to work with you. So I would say that it's okay to reach out to them, you know, once a week or so to show interest. Once you've had a phone interview with the hiring manager, you know, certainly check in. Once you've had your on-site, you know, definitely check in. You know, it's not uncommon for them to give you a timeline. And if they don't, you know, I would definitely follow up with the recruiter and say, hey, do you know the timeline as to when they're looking to make this hire? But I think the most important thing with that is your tone. So, you know, you don't want to come across as aggressive. You want to come across as excited. You don't want to start off with the email or the voicemail with, you know, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't heard back. You know, I had thought it was going to be a couple of days and it's not. You know, while you may feel frustrated, you don't want to necessarily relay that. You want to come from a place of happy, come from a place of excitement, and just let them know that you're excited, you're there, you're excited, and you're willing to answer any questions as needed.
Very good. The next question is, do you have any advice about how to go about phone interviews if you had a bad connection? At my apartment, the cell reception's pretty poor, and I definitely cut off interviewers a lot during the phone interview.
Yeah. Go somewhere else. You know, you want to go somewhere where you have a good connection and you don't want to be muted. So if you have to be muted somewhere, that is not the place to do a phone interview. The point of a phone interview is to have very comfortable dialogue. So if the hiring manager says something funny and you're muted, they don't hear you laugh. So then they might be like, oh, okay, I guess they don't think I'm funny, right? So, you want to be somewhere where the dialogue is open, it's free, and it's clear. So if your connection is not good there, then you certainly want to go somewhere else. Like Kelly said, you don't want to be driving in a car, but if you could be in a car somewhere without it running, that may be okay. But again, you don't want to be muted. You want to have like crystal clear coverage. Make sure your phone's charged, you know, and just have that place ready to go. If it's not your apartment, find somewhere else. Even if it's a friend's house, you know, that's okay. Just make sure that your connection is good and you can have your phone unmuted the entire time to have that natural dialogue.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, if you've got a really strong Wi-Fi connection, most phones will let you take your calls via the Wi-Fi. So that might be an option as well, too.
Another option you might look at if needed is your local library. You know, a lot of times they have rooms that people can go in to study or to read or whatever it may be. So don't underestimate your local library. They may be able to hook you up with a spot that has great connection and you will be undisturbed the entire time.
All right. That's it for questions for now.
Okay, so let's move on to the on-site interview prep during and post. Okay, so with an on-site interview, you want to make sure you know the location that you're traveling to. If at all possible and it's fairly local, do a test run there. See how long it takes you to arrive at the facility. Don't assume, for example, Corning is a very large facility with many different buildings. So don't assume because you know the business that you're interviewing at, don't assume it's at the building you are most aware of. Definitely double check the address. Like I said, do a run through if you can. Also take into account things like, do you need time to check in with a security person at the front door? Is that gonna, you know, take a few minutes to do? Do you need to arrive a little earlier to do that? Be aware of the dress code and dress appropriately. If you're not aware and you need to ask somebody, like the person scheduling you or your recruiter, please feel comfortable doing so. Also feel comfortable reviewing the schedule with your recruiter. If there's something that you're confused about, certainly ask questions. But at minimum, review the schedule on your own so you kind of know the details of the day that you're about to endure. And travel. If you're traveling in for an interview, make sure that you're aware of those travel plans. Make sure you have a contact number should something go awry during those travel plans. Somebody you can reach out to for assistance if needed. And also for prepping with an on-site interview, we've talked a lot about asking questions. I think depending on the style of your on-site interview, many times you're with a certain person for 30 minutes and then you talk to another person for 30 minutes. If at all possible, find out the titles of those folks and you know, maybe their tenure at their current role, so you can kind of tailor the questions to the interviews, especially if you have a long day. You may come prepared with questions, but end up at the last interviewer and just really don't have any questions to ask that person. So take a few minutes and just go through each person you're interviewing with and designate a few questions so that doesn't happen. We already talked about reviewing LinkedIn profiles. You know, that kind of translates across all types of interviews, but with on-site interviews, I think that's especially important as well. A couple of no-brainers, please don't be late. That's the reason you want to really make sure that you know where you're going, you know where to park, you know if you need money for a parking meter, or a parking garage or something. Just make sure you have all of that ironed out ahead of time. Don't make assumptions that you know exactly where you're supposed to be and haven't done that run through and then you have a surprise and suddenly you're late.
So we had a quick question come in. This one may have come in a little bit late, but if you have a virtual interview / video call, what is the proper attire to wear? And Julie, I'll direct that to you since you look so snazzy today.
Well, thank you. I would say you always want to dress up. You know, you want to err on the side of dressing a little bit nicer. Business casual means a little bit something different to everybody. So, you know, err on the side of what you would wear to an in-person interview. You know, while some companies may be more casual, I think, again, it comes down to presenting your best self. So whether that is a suit and a tie, whether that's some sort of a dress shirt, you know, presenting your best self while still being comfortable. You know, you want to make sure that you've tried this on, that you've like moved around in it. Like you don't want to put it on for the first day and look visibly uncomfortable. You know, you got to make sure you can move. You want to be able to move your arms, shake hands, because someday that may be a thing again. I don't know. But you want to be able to move. So dress, you know, as nicely as you feel comfortable. Err on the side of dressing very professional, but then make sure you can move in that outfit. You know, if it doesn't fit well, if it fits awkwardly, if you don't feel good, that's going to shine through. So that's my advice.
I would say probably not the right day to break in a new pair of shoes. I would say if you get a pair just for the interview, walk around in those a little bit, you know, a couple days or a week before, so that you just kind of get used to it, because sometimes it can be the little things like that that can just throw you off kilter, and really kind of cause you to not be able to present your best self. And I think that the old adage of better to be overdressed than under is, you know, I'd always rather be in the boat of being overdressed than somebody saying, wow, they came really underdressed. And if you gave Kim and Julie and myself enough time, there are so many different experiences and stories that we could share with you. One that I recall, there was an individual coming in to interview for a fairly high level position. And I'll just say they didn't dress the part, and it really showed through. And the interview team was just very, very surprised at that level, at that point in their career, that they wouldn't have known to do differently. So you guys just starting out, you know, again, better to be overdressed than underdressed.
So I had a question come in the private chat, and this is kind of piggybacking on that one. Is it poor form, or is it, you know, bad judgment to ask prior to the interview what a dress code might be?
I don't think so. I've answered that many times when I was a recruiter. You know, if I would typically offer that information, but sometimes people would ask beforehand what they should wear, and I think that that's very reasonable. I mean, Corning they want you to dress professional, but I certainly know, supporting IT, and I've supported IT for many years now, that there are companies elsewhere where that may not be appropriate. You know, if you came in a suit and tie, that may be very against their culture and you may appear stuffy. Now, I would say that that's a unique situation, not the typical situation, but it certainly does. And, you know, it's worth noting, it's worth being aware of. You know, more information is always better. That's a one-off situation, but I would say that, you know, Kelly's comment, it pretty much holds true. You know, you always want to be your best dressed self that day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Julie,
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to add to that a little bit. You know, Kelly, your story reminded me of a couple situations where candidates came in and, you know, the clothing was appropriate, but it wasn't pressed. It wasn't neatly ironed. You know, you just need to make sure all of the details are there if people notice those things. And just to piggyback too on the answer to, is it appropriate to ask for dress code ahead of time? I would say absolutely. I agree with Julie. And there are certain manufacturing facilities where you may be required to wear closed-toed shoes or dress in a certain way. So I think that's a really great question to ask as you're preparing.
Or flats. If you're going to a plant, I know this from personal experience. If you do not have flats in your bag, you usually have to put these like steel toe covers over your shoes, and you can't put those over heels. So if you are interviewing in a plant, you need to be prepared and have the right shoes on. Otherwise, you won't be able to go on that tour.
And, you know, while we're still kind of chatting about the preparing phase, don't forget to eat something that morning, even if it's just a little something. Just get a little something in your belly, even if you've got, you know, butterflies and you're nervous. You don't have to sit down and eat a huge breakfast, but something, you know, and maybe bring a granola bar to put in your bag or something, and hydrate, because, you know, again, you could be there for 2 hours, you could be there for 6. Sometimes, you know, it just is based on the manager and how they want the interview structured. So you don't want to forget those, because I just think, you know, it's so important. You need to be fueled throughout the day.
No yawning during your interview.
So we had
It's frowned upon.
another question come through here. It says, and this is kind of in the mold of, or in the vein of preparation. What is the best way to convey technical information through a phone interview? I have personally had problems describing my previous experiences over the phone.
So I support IT. We have this happen fairly often, and I think this is where it's important to know who you're talking to. Technical people are going to be very excited. They're going to ask very technical questions, and they're going to be looking for a technical answer. So, just being as concise as possible while answering their question and being technical is what they're looking for. That being said, if you're phone screening with HR, if you're phone screening with somebody who's not technical, you want to make sure that you are able and comfortable to explain very technical things to non-technical people, and you want to make sure that you have those answers prepped both ways, and make sure that you're speaking to your audience, because I know that that's one thing that Corning is consistently looking for in IT. Engagement is very important. So when you're being hired into a technical position, you need to be able to speak to both technical and non-technical people. So that's definitely one of the things that they are screening for. And they want to see how you can convey your experiences, but to a person that's not technical. So being able to, make it appropriate for the audience. That's going to be a key part to a lot of the positions that are in corporate IT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think knowing your audience is key. And, for explaining really technical things, you'll have worked with your recruiter for a little bit by this point, and your recruiter will have asked you certain questions that may be very technical in nature, maybe not. Again, it just depends. But I would really just make sure that, in your mind, or even if you have it written down, what are some of the very key things you've done that are technical, or accomplishments, or a project that you worked on, and maybe you can speak a little bit to that, and they say, oh, okay, yep, they get it, they're definitely technical enough. Try to relate it to the relevancy of the job if you can do that, but knowing your audience, like Julie said, that is very key.
Yes, and don't say like, how do I dumb this down? I understand it's a common expression. It's never going to go over well in an interview with somebody that's not technical. So find a different way to kind of say that, because I've had so many people say that to HR and IT interviews, and then HR is like, oh, okay, they told me that they had to like dumb it down for me. And that's just never going to feel good. So you want to be careful what you're saying, how you're saying it. And like I said, be prepared with examples that are non-technical, or be prepared to translate a technical example to a non-technical person. It will serve you so well. It will make the transition very easy, and it's going to be more comfortable for everybody.
And, Julie, just to add to that, I've had experiences where candidates are trying to explain something to me and they're highly technical, and I am not. And a lot of times they'll say, well, you know what, Kelly, how much do you know about optical fiber? Are you dealing with that a lot? And if I say, oh gosh, I know enough to be dangerous, but that's really it, and they laugh and they say, okay, and then they have a frame of reference from which to work, so they can, understand, like, okay. Or if they were to say to me, how familiar are you with, I don't know, electrical components or something? And if I said, oh yes, I studied that, I know it, then they know how to direct themselves from there.
Mm-hmm.
And just a quick little piggyback before we go to the next question. Something that back in my recruiter days, when I was a hardcore recruiter, I would always recommend my candidates do as well, is to think of a handful of experiences that they've gone through that they can use as reference points, and then sit down and write them out on paper. And then once you write them out, read through it, eliminate anything that could be considered as jargon or things that may cause additional questions, and just like simplify it as much as possible so that you can be as articulate as possible. And with that knowledge and preparation comes the confidence. It'll come through in the way that you present the information as well. Cool. All right, so the next question, I'm going to just kind of paraphrase a little bit, because I think I see where they're headed with this. But when is it advisable to reschedule an interview? And then they said, if needed due to some reason, how should that be handled?
So I'll jump in. You know, everybody understands that outside of the four walls of work, there is a life. You know, you do have a life outside of your school and your work, and things happen. So I've seen, you know, situations where, very unfortunately, there has been a death in the family, or that individual has come down the day before and then they are just very sick. And maybe I had a few situations earlier this year where candidates got the flu, and it kind of hit them quickly, and they told us and we actioned as fast as we could. I would say that as soon as you know something is happening and you're not going to be able to make it, you let your contacts know as soon as possible, whether that's your recruiter, whether that's the individual you're working with to coordinate your schedule or your travel. Just make sure you let them know as soon as possible, because if they have maybe coordinated a flight and a hotel for you, there's, you know, behind the scenes work that needs to happen if you're not going to be there for it. So yeah, there are a lot of different things that can happen. You know, I've had people, their children get sick and they have to be the one to stay home. They don't have any other option. And so most companies, I would say, are pretty understanding about it. I mean, as long as it's not like, you know, hey, I know I was supposed to come in on Wednesday, but I just found out one of my really good friends is going to be in town. So can I just reschedule for next week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next up we have, do interviewers want us to bring printed out copies of our own resumes, and do they mind if we have a notebook that we are referencing or taking notes on?
I'll take that one. I would absolutely come prepared with printed copies of your resumes. Most of the interview teams will also have one, but in the event that they're running behind from another meeting or, you know, just didn't have a chance to grab it off the printer, I would have one and come prepared with it. Also a notebook, absolutely. I've had many candidates dinged for not having a notebook and not taking a series of notes throughout the interview process. So yes to all of that.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you, Kim.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Let's see here. We have one come in that says, can I say I have reviewed their LinkedIn profile and then ask questions?
I think so.
I think as long as it's relatable, you know, you want to find the right timing. Right timing's everything in life. So you might not want to lead with that. And, you know, you may at the end when they have questions, you know, it depends what it's about. You know, you could say, oh, you know, I saw earlier, I was doing some research and I had saw that earlier in your career, you know, you worked at GE, you know, how does Corning compare to your time at GE? Or, you know, what made you want to come to Corning and leave GE? So, you know, it's all about how you phrase it. You don't want to come across, I hate to say creepy or like stalkerish, but, you know, you want to make sure that you're using that information appropriately and turning it into something that is an appropriate question that you're going to learn something from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you don't want to derail the interview by referencing the fact that you've looked at their LinkedIn profile. But like Julie said, I think there's appropriate situations where that can be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you see any commonalities in their profile, their experience, maybe where they went to school or, you know, something like that, that is relevant to bring up and make that connection point with that individual. But the time and place, you know, has to be right.
Okay. So in the interest of getting us finished on time, I'm going to allow these ladies to finish up their presentation, and then we'll get through the rest of the questions that you guys are asking some really great questions, by the way.
Okay.
You guys want to take it away? I'm going to make sure that I keep a note of each
I think I'm up next, right?
Yes, ma'am, you are next.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about during the on-site interview. When you're going on site, again, you know, you've already done all the prep work. Now you're there. This is your time to, you know, really shine. So you want to make sure that when you're there, that you're engaging with the folks that are on site, that you're saying hello, that you're introducing yourself, whether this is handshaking, eye contact, all of those things. You want to make sure that the greetings are in place, making note of names. I'm terrible personally when I meet somebody and I say that, hi, I'm Julie, what's your name? And they tell me their name. I so often don't listen to that name. So it's important to really make a mental note of the name, maybe have your schedule written out ahead of time. If there's somebody that wasn't on the schedule, just make sure you write down their name so you know who you're talking to and you're not mistaking names. I can't tell you how many times I've been called the wrong name in an interview, and it's fine. It happens, right? But you know it, when you're called the wrong name. So make eye contact, ask questions like we've been saying all along, be prepared with questions. If they're talking and you think of a question, again, that's why it's important to have that notebook, write the question down and then, circle back. Good posture. You don't want to be slouching over the desk. You don't want to be leaning back. There's a lot of weird things that you could do, but you want to make sure that you're very aware of your body language and that you're aware of their body language, right? So now that you're in person, you have that added advantage that you can see, are they comfortable? Are they uncomfortable? Are they loosening up? And you should be doing the same. So be aware of yours, be aware of theirs, be a good listener, make sure it's a comfortable dialogue. They're talking half the time, you're talking half the time. And then again, for some don'ts, don't interrupt. Don't look at your phone, don't even have your phone out. There's very few reasons that I can think of why your phone should even be out. Put it away, have your notebook. You're there to interview, so focus on them. Do not look at your phone. Look at the person who's talking to you. Don't be looking all around the room. If there's windows, don't be staring out the window. If there's more than one person, look at the person who's talking to you. Don't stare at people. You just want to be very aware. You want to make sure that it's, appropriate body language is all I can say. Looking at them, looking at the other person who's talking, looking at your notebook, you want it to be comfortable. If it's something that would make you uncomfortable, don't do it. So, be there, be present, watch your body language, and you're going to do very well.
I would say, Julie, on the posture and the body language part, I've observed situations at Corning where maybe the individual interviewing for the job already works at Corning, so they would consider them an internal candidate because they're already there. And there was a situation one time where an employee was interviewing for a different job, and they came into the interview and they sat back in the chair very, very relaxed, and the interview team took note. And, they'd work together. There was, they'd work together. There's a history there. They do know one another. But even if that's the case, it just reinforces, they're going to hold their internal candidates to that standard. They're going to hold you to it as well.
Yes. And be aware of your tics. If you're a foot tapper, if you are going to tap your phone, if you're going to tap your fingers, if you're going to twirl your fingers, be aware of what those are and make a conscious effort to not do that during your interview. It may be difficult, it requires quite a bit of focus, but know your weaknesses in that sense and be ready for those going into that situation.
Okay, so awesome. Thank you, Julie. So after you're wrapping up your on-site interview, you're getting ready to head out the door, ask for the job, assuming that you still want it after you've been through the interview, ask for it, right? Managers love that. They talk about that when they all get together to debrief following your interview. They'll say, well, did they ask for the job? And several people may say, yes, they did. And that's just always a very good, genuine sign of your interest. And so if that's how you honestly feel, absolutely ask for it. When it comes to follow-up emails, again, you can always do this through your recruiter who can help get these follow-up emails to the team members. I would say the most important thing about that is do not write a canned thank you and send the same one to everyone and only change the name of the person you're sending it to. And I'll tell you why. We had an interview where after the interview, the candidate wrote handwritten notes to every person on the interview team. Maybe it wasn't handwritten, it might have been email, I don't remember, but they did the note and they were very specific with each individual. It was not a canned, response to all of them. This person referenced specific things they addressed with that person in the interview, and they spoke about that. So if you were to just write, oh, thank you so much for your time, I appreciate it. If everyone got that, probably doesn't feel very genuine to them, right? But they were so impressed with this individual because they literally wrote a different one for each person, and they kind of compared notes afterwards, if you will. And I remember that they were so impressed by that. And that really helped that individual's candidacy. So keep that in mind. Again, if there's maybe a funny little connection you made with somebody, maybe you went to the same school or grew up, in an area nearby, try and remember those things so that you can revert back to it maybe, and again, just try to make that connection. As far as follow-up, again, it's very similar to what Julie said before. This is really when you're going to be very close working with your recruiter, and they're going to update you on feedback. And that's at least how we operate. As far as don'ts, so you're probably looking at this and say, wait a minute, don't edit your LinkedIn profile to say you got the job after your interview. We had a situation several years ago where an individual did a phone interview, and the next day comes and everyone's working, and I get a frantic call from someone, and they said, I just happened to be on LinkedIn, and the person I spoke to yesterday changed their employer to us and changed their current job to the one that we spoke to them about. And in all my years, that was a first. And so I said, okay, perhaps there was a technical glitch. We don't know. Let's dig deep and find out. Let's investigate. And the candidate said, well, I didn't do that. There must have been like some technical error. It was a bit awkward. So needless to say, we did not proceed with that individual. And that is such a rare occurrence, but again, it happened. So I thought it would be good for you guys to hear and to share, to not do that. And, I would say don't just stay silent and kind of, go undercover and wait for everyone to get back to you. It's appropriate to follow up with your recruiter. Again, like Julie said, if you're at this stage in the interview, you're excited, you're anxious, you want to know how you did, you want to know if you're going to that next step. So, reaching out to the recruiter, 2 times a week or something, I think that's perfectly acceptable. But the worst thing you can do is wrap up your interview and make no contact with the recruiter to let them know how it went. You make, no contact with the interview team. That is what you absolutely don't want to do.
Okay, so we have one more type of interview, which is probably the most popular right now in today's climate. So we'll cover those. But first, I just wanted to tell you a really funny story about remembering people's names. So Julie kind of touched on, anything you can do to try to remember somebody's name, pick out something that will remind you and jot that down, whatever it takes. But Julie was visiting the Corning headquarters with me several years ago, and we had meetings with some of the finance folks. And of course, she introduced herself as Julie Sutton. Her name's been on tons of things up until this point, right? Well, she became known as Janet for several years to this one hiring manager. I still think he thinks she's Janet.
He did. Yeah, he kept calling me Janet, and I was like, it's Julie, and like we've met like 4 times. But it's fine. I have a name tag on, but that's fine.
No, she's just Janet.
You could call you Karen.
Okay, so let's talk about virtual interviewing, since again, that is the most common type in today's climate. Preparing for that's going to be a little bit different than the phone interview and the on-site, because you want to make sure you're testing whatever device you're using to connect to the video. You want to make sure you test your mic ahead of time. You want to make sure you test your camera ahead of time. And I don't mean 10 minutes ahead of time. Really go in and make sure that's working. Corning's been doing a lot of this virtual interviewing, and we've had more than a handful of problems with candidates unable to connect to their video. And though the interview can still go on and the audio is there, it's nice to have a candidate prepare and make sure that that works ahead of time. Also, know the platform that you're going to be using for the virtual interview and test that out as well. Make sure you are, signing on a few minutes early and everything's working properly. Same with the phone interviews and on-site. You want to prepare questions. In any virtual interview situation, you should have the interviewer's name, title. Make sure you're catering those questions to that particular title and role. And same as, the other ones. Don't just skim the website and the job description. Make sure you know those inside and out and can talk to those and relate your experience to those and ask questions as appropriate about the company.
Okay. All right. And another funny thing, when you're preparing for virtual interviews, I mean, we've all seen all the like snafus on the news, people being dressed from the top up, and then standing up or, not realizing the scope of their screen, right? So like I noticed today when I was testing this out that it was much smaller. And then when the whole video came on, that it was actually bigger and showing more of my background. So be aware of, what is actually being seen in your background, of, how much of your body is being shown, all of those things. Because if you haven't seen it on the news, it's funny to look into it, but these are real things that can happen. So,
Julie, before you go on, can I share a super quick story about how good you are? Yeah. So if you guys can see behind me, there is this green door. I am in my office in the basement. Behind that green door is a bathroom. And a month or two ago, I was delivering a training to a fairly large group of people, and I did not know these folks. This was the first time we were meeting. And my younger daughter had come downstairs, and I just happened to glance up at the right time and see her in the camera. And she was about to use that bathroom in front of 20 people with the door wide open. And I had to scramble to put my thing on mute. I turned around, I had to yell at her. And when I came back right off mute, of course, it was at a point in the thing where someone said, "Oh, Kelly, would you like to answer that question?" And no faking it till you make it there. I just had to be honest and say, I am so sorry. I do not know what you just asked. And a few of the people had seen what happened and they thought it was funny. But it's definitely not the norm. But I think that, like Julie said, you've heard stories and seen stuff on the news and the internet, and we get it. It happens. I was incredibly embarrassed, but then you realize, wow, there's a lot of folks in the same boat that are kind of dealing with the same issues behind the scenes. So, yeah, she almost did that. So,
yeah, kids are fun. All right, so yeah, there's things that can go wrong in the virtual interview. So be prepared for those. Make sure everybody in your house knows that you're in a good spot to do so. So once it's on, you're there, you're looking good. I would say one of the more important things, and I could be guilty of this as well, is don't look at yourself. Look at them. It's really, you can tell most of the time when the person's not, if you're engaging with somebody, especially if this is a one-on-one virtual interview, you want to look into that camera, look at that person, don't look at yourself. Don't sit there. I mean, I'm always like touching my hair and stuff, and I have to make a conscious effort not to. So, if you're like looking at yourself, you're like, oh, like what's going on there? Like that comes through. Like they can see you. And I used to tell my kids that when they were doing Zoom calls during virtual learning, like you can see them, they can see you, don't do anything weird that you don't want on the video. So the best thing you can do is treat it like it's still a face-to-face, have yourself prepared. Look at that person. Don't look at yourself. You wouldn't stand there with a mirror while you're in a real interview, fixing your hair or worrying about stuff. That ship has sailed. Your hair is what it is. Your outfit is what it is. You should have, like Kim said, you should have already prepped for that. So now you're there, you're smiling, you have your posture, you have your eye contact, and now you're going through the regular interview protocol. So, you're not interrupting, you're on point, you have your questions, your experience, So it's a virtual interview, you're looking at them though, and you're treating it like they're right there. All distractions, try to get rid of them, just like a phone interview. Try to have yourself in a position where ideally there's nobody around you, there's nothing distracting, I mean, we all know when, you're on a call, and when you're speaking, that's when UPS comes and needs a signature. You know, those things will happen, but do your best to push through, do your best to focus, look at the person you're talking to, and again, present your best self, just like you were there sitting in person.
And the advice for what to do after a virtual interview is really going to be very similar to what we talked about after a phone interview. You know, you want to follow up with your recruiter, you know, to let them know how it went and how did they leave it with the manager. And, you know, also try and find out were there any unanswered questions from the phone interview, or maybe you go back to the recruiter and, you know, you yourself say, well, there was something we spoke about, but then the manager had another meeting, so we weren't able to finish that conversation. And I'd like to maybe just share some relevant detail in an email, whatever that may be. But you want to make sure that, you know, you haven't left any loop open, and you've tied that up there. And then again, the worst thing you can do is just assume you've got it in the bag and you just sit and you're silent and wait for everyone to come to you. That's not the right approach here. You want to be, you know, definitely very communicative with your recruiter, letting them know your interest level and yeah, your interest level in the job and what the timeline is for next steps. Okay, that actually brings us to the end of our presentation.
All right, we got tons of questions for you guys, so why don't we just dive right on in. Let's see here. First question is, oh, this is going to be a good one. If you get stumped on a question, how should you go about responding to it?
I think it depends. So if you're stumped because you just don't have that experience, you know, if they're asking you about a specific technology or they're asking you about, you know, just something that you don't have, you want to be honest and say, you know, I haven't worked with, you know, C#, but, you know, I've done quite a bit of work in C++, which is, you know, quite comparable, and I think I would transition well into that. If you simply don't understand the question, you know, ask them to repeat it again, maybe ask them to rephrase it, but you want to do your best to, I would say you want to do your best to get a good answer out. Kelly or Kim?
I agree, but it is okay to pause and think before you speak. It's okay to take a few seconds to just really think before you provide an answer. But I agree, Julie, try to get something out, but absolutely be honest. If you don't have what they're looking for in that specific question, be honest about that.
Yeah. And don't hesitate to ask for more clarity around the question. Sometimes they may phrase it differently when they ask you again, and your brain kind of ticks and you say, oh, okay, I've got it. So sometimes it's just all the way the question is asked. So if you need that clarity, don't ever hesitate to ask for it.
That's a good point. Next question. What kind of advice would you give for Zoom or video interviews like behavioral advice? And do you think there will be a rise in these types of interviews?
I think we might have answered that as we went through that last slide, but if there's any clarification needed, maybe let us know.
Fair enough. All right, so this one says, what's the purpose of my on-site presentation slides? It should not have very much details is what they meant to say, of my work to make my audience confused, but too general also may appear shallow. Do you have any tips on the slides?
That's a great question. And most times, if a company has asked you to come with a presentation, most of them are going to give you detail around what it is they're looking for. Mark, we'd love for you to come in and present to us your 30, 60, 90-day plan. If you were hired in this job, what would you do? Or if there's a certain technology that you've worked with, please maybe share with us, if you're an engineer and you developed a product or whatever that may be. So you want to make sure you get that detail and understand who you're presenting to. So again, you know your audience and you can tailor it accordingly. And just again, make sure there's clarity there. The worst thing you can do is just assume, oh, I know what they want, I know what they're asking for, and then you're not on the same page as them. The purpose of it, I think, is twofold. One, I think it is to explore whatever area they've asked you to present on a bit further, and delve into more of what you know and understand, but then also to see, how do you present yourself, and how do you present that information? Do you stand up there and have your head down and you won't look at anyone because you're nervous, or are you able to get up there and reference the slide and speak to it accordingly? I think they're looking for your comfort level there as well.
All right. Very good. Next question. And I think we may have touched on this a little bit, but I just want to make sure that if we didn't, we cover this for the person who asked. If a dress code says something like business casual or Western business attire, I'm hoping that's what they meant. Is it acceptable to ask what this means? I feel like when I Google women's business casual, the results are very different.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think we spoke about this, but don't hesitate to ask. I mean, wouldn't you rather know than assume? So yeah, there's nothing inappropriate or wrong where if someone says it's business casual and you say, can you explain to me maybe a little bit more about what that means here at Corning for women? Does that mean a pantsuit? Does that mean if I wear a nice dress and high heels, I'm okay? What does that kind of mean here? No one is ever going to think that's a silly question. No one's ever going to think, oh goodness, I can't believe they asked me that. It's good. You're trying to get as much insight as possible. So don't ever hesitate to ask that.
Yeah. And when in doubt, go business professional. You know, always go a little bit nicer. Don't go the other way.
I think I'm noticing a theme here. All right, next question. Is it appropriate to take notes when you ask them questions during interviews?
Absolutely.
That was easy. All right, next up. What advice do you have for a student on how to connect with recruiters and what kind of conversation one should engage in non-technical recruiters? And then the follow-up to that is also, how do you start a conversation on LinkedIn with managers or people in certain positions where one is looking for a job?
Can you maybe just let's kind of cut that in half, and can you repeat that first half to us again, and let's address that part and parcel?
Absolutely. The first part is, what advice do you have for students on how to connect with recruiters, and what kind of conversation should one engage in should have with non-technical recruiters?
So I think that if you're maybe trying to establish a connection with a recruiter, online, a lot of times when recruiters write their own profile, they talk about the areas they specialize in. And that's exactly what, Kim and Julie and I did at the start of this. Julie has referenced, I support IT and I support HR. So usually they'll say that. So if the recruiter is aligned in terms of the groups they support with your discipline and what you're looking for, then I think, again, if you were to reach out on LinkedIn and introduce yourself, but also, be clear about why you're reaching out. I wouldn't just, send an invite to connect and leave it at that. I would say specifically, here's why I'd love to, maybe speak with you or talk with you when you have time. Did that help to answer that? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Or I would say a lot of times if you are in LinkedIn or you're on another specialty site, they may have their email on there. I don't check my LinkedIn messages all the time anymore since I'm not recruiting day to day and I'm client facing. My email, I believe, is listed in my LinkedIn. I know a lot of recruiters do that, so maybe send them an email. And again, the why, the specific job that you're referencing, why you're interested in Corning, I think is important. I think it's also important, as great as the recruiters are, be involved in their company page. If somebody's posting something, engage. That's a great way to draw attention to yourself. It's a great way to ask questions. And it's great getting in with hiring or with the hiring managers potentially, or people on the team, and you strike up a conversation on the right post, and that could be your in.
And I think Kelly was touching on this, just to kind of piggyback on that. I think for that question, I think what's really important is identifying the right recruiter and making sure that the recruiter that you're trying to connect with and partner with is a recruiter that can actually help you. So if they're not in your space, they're probably not going to be much help for you. Most recruiters focus on a specific niche market, so you'll want to be certain before you reach out to them that recruiter is someone that will be able to grant you the access to that space that you're looking to get into. So second part was also, how do you start a conversation on LinkedIn with managers or people in certain positions where you're looking for a job?
That can be kind of tricky. There may be one school of folks that say, I don't know that I would necessarily go reaching out to a manager there. Sometimes it can be difficult just with how companies are organized and structured. Unless it says this reports to this individual, you may have a hard time figuring that out on your own, or unless maybe the recruiter shared with you the name of the manager and then you looked it up from there. I would probably be mindful and cautious about doing that. Again, I would look at, their specific company page and maybe ways to start to engage there by liking posts, or maybe asking questions that, someone is monitoring that they can answer. I don't know that going directly to the person is the right way, because again, if it's not really in their area, they're not likely to do anything really with it. They'll just really think, oh, I can't really help, and then they move on to the next thing they're doing.
The other thing you could do,
go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say, the other thing you could do is, if you do find a name and have access to a name, maybe look and see if you have any common connections that you're more comfortable reaching out to try to get to them that way.
That's a great point. Yes.
Or using alumni, especially with big companies, there's probably somebody there that went to the same school that you did. So, doing a little bit of research and sending a note and saying, hey, I saw we both went to Penn State, I'd really be interested in just, learning more about how you went from Penn State to Corning and the transition. And, if you were ever open to it, I'd love to pick your brain and, make it more of an alumni thing. I've had people do that to me. You've done that when I was in sales positions. People usually are pretty proud of their schools. They like those connections. So you want to be strategic about it. You want to be thoughtful about it. But I have found that angle to be very successful. But it's important that you're genuine when you're doing that.
Very good. All right, so next up is when you don't have contact info of the interviewer, is it okay to just follow up with that contact person?
So you mean if you don't have contact information for the manager, but is it okay to reach out to your recruiter or possibly the person that helped coordinate your schedules? Yes. Yes, and in many cases, again, I think a lot of companies have kind of moved to a place where they don't just give that information out to people. They're a bit more protective of what they would consider, as sensitive information in terms of their email or their number. So yeah, absolutely okay to go back to your recruiter. I can't tell you how many times candidates have written very lovely emails thanking people for their time. The recruiter shares it with me. I share it with the manager, hey, just FYI, we wanted to share this with you. So yeah, nothing wrong with that at all.
Cool. Next one, this may be a strange question, but what do you have to say for kinesthetic learners who listen better when they are moving? This would be the person who would be like walking around pacing and just really animated while they're on a call, because they actually are able to absorb the information better that way.
It's a very insightful question.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could confidently answer that without having a bit more experience with it and maybe a bit more knowledge. I hate to say, oh, I'm not answering your question, but I'm going to just hesitate there because I don't know that I know enough to properly answer you. I'm sorry.
My thought would be clear a path where you know there are zero encumberments, so that if you need to pace, you can do so without any hazards or anything like that. If that really and genuinely helps you learn, just make sure that you have a clear path and a clear area where you can do your thing, and make sure that you don't trip and fall, or you don't walk into an area where there might be any sort of distraction. Next up, can you guys explain what you mean by ask for the job?
Oh, yes. So you're wrapping up your interviews with the team and you're shaking hands. Oh, it was lovely to meet you. Lovely to spend time with you today. Thank you so much. You know, that's when you can say to the manager, to someone else you spent time with during that interview, you know, I am really excited about what I learned. This seems like a place I'd love to work. I would love to do this role here. I really think that based on what I've learned and based on my experience and my education, I feel like there's a lot I could really contribute. And I would love an opportunity to be part of this, and be part of the team and part of all the growth that your company is going through. The key there is being genuine, being honest, not just, hey, listen, I really need a job, so if you could give me this one, that would really be very helpful. No, you want to make sure that you can tie it up in a little bow, you know, and again, kind of pull some of the things you learn throughout the day and try and figure out and communicate where you can make an impact and what is it about it that you're so interested in. So that would be my thought.
Yep. And I think another neat little trick will be also to make, when you're doing that, to really tie in little bits and pieces of information from the conversation that you had with that person that showcase your skills and how they align with the position you're applying for. Let's see. Is there a good way to handle forgetting a name or being unsure of the name when there are multiple interviewers?
I think it depends the situation, because again, I've been guilty of this. So if you really don't know their name and you're in person, you know, eye contact and like shifting your view to that person is a good way to direct the question towards them. You know, if you feel like you have to say their name, or sometimes if you aren't sure how to pronounce their name properly, you know, I'll write it out phonetically on my paper if I have to, just as kind of a little trick for how to pronounce it. Write their names down ahead of time, so hopefully you don't get there. That's why the notebook comes in handy. You know, it's not an ideal situation to show that, you know, you don't know their name, because again, you want to show that you're really invested, that you're engaged. Of course it happens, you know, do your best to avoid it. And that's again where that notebook really comes into play. And if you can just avoid it by, like I said, directing the eye contact or shifting your body weight, I think that's going to help them know who you're talking to.
And I think in a lot of cases, your recruiter is going to share with you the plan for the day ahead of time, right? So that you can see who it is you're spending time with and interviewing with. So if there happens to be a name on there that you're having some trouble pronouncing, you can always say to the recruiter, can you tell me how to pronounce this individual's name correctly? And then, like Julie said, if there's any little trick that you use to remember that, whether it's the phonetic spelling or it's a rhyme or whatever it may be, you really do want to try your best. You know, and especially if they've shared this information with you beforehand. You know, sometimes the way people display their badges can be different. So some women might put it on a lanyard and it's around their neck and you can see it. A lot of times people will put it on like their belt buckle. So if they're seated, You can't be like looking under the table and be like, what is your name? So yeah, it happens and everybody understands it, but it's one of those things that you want to work hard to make sure it doesn't happen to you.
Print off the schedule. If they send you a schedule, try to print it off, have it there, have it ready. You know, a perfect real world example is I'm covering a meeting for Kim Smithman next week. She, you know, sent me some notes over on it. I went through the notes. There was a name that I wasn't sure of. I sent her a message and said, hey, is this how you pronounce this person's name? You know, that way when I'm going in to leave that call, I sound, you know, like I know who I'm talking to, even though these are folks that I have not interacted with because it's not a group I would normally support. So that extra little bit of prep is going to go a long way for them and mostly for you, making you comfortable and feeling confident going into that interview.
Yeah. And you know what? I've had situations where I'm talking with an individual who was not born in the United States. And when I looked at their name and tried in my mind to say it the way I thought it was, and felt very unsure of myself, and I knew I was getting ready to speak to that person, I would say up front, I would say, can you please pronounce your first name for me? I want to make sure that I say it correctly. And I tell them that. And they say, oh, yes, you know, thank you. And they'll pronounce it, or maybe they'll say, oh, but you can call me this. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. If someone didn't know how to pronounce my name and they asked me, I wouldn't think twice. I would just say, oh, this is how you say it. And, you know, this may sound a little corny, but somebody took time to name you. Someone took time to think of it and come up with what they thought was right. And so people need to respect it. And if it's a name that you've maybe never seen or heard, totally okay to say, can you just pronounce that for me so I can make sure I'm saying it correctly? I don't think you can go wrong with that.
And I agree. I mean, it goes in the reverse too. If a candidate's coming in and the team doesn't know how to pronounce their name, they'll ask us to make sure that they respect that and pronounce it properly. So
yeah,
I think
great point.
Absolutely. And as the poster boy for unique names, we are quite appreciative when you ask us how to pronounce our name as opposed to taking a stab at it and butchering it. Guys, we are out of time here. So, again, thank you to you, Julie, Kelly, Kimberly, for the presentation. Lots of great info. Thank you to the participants for the great questions. We weren't able to answer all of them, but I am taking notes on each one of these questions and who asked them, and I will make sure that we find a way to get you guys answers to your questions. And then as for the actual audio and video of today's session, it was recorded. The video and audio will be available later this week or at some point early next week, so be on the lookout for that. With that said, I want to thanks everyone again for your time, and we hope you found this informative and helpful, and we will see you in the next sessions.
Bye, guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.